Welcome to the History of Special Education Law in America by Thomas Savi. Special education in America has taken numerous steps forward in the last 70 years. There are many landmark cases and legislation that have ensured that all students in the U.S. receive a free, appropriate education regardless of any disabilities they may have. Four landmark cases include Brown v. Board of Education, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Education for All Handicapped Children Act, and Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The first special education programs were delinquency prevention programs for at-risk children who lived in urban slums. Early special education programs also focused on the moral training of African American children. Special schools and special classes for children with disabilities, especially deafness, blindness, and mental retardation, did exist in America in the 19th century and gradually increased during the 20th century. Programs for children with specific learning disabilities became more common in the 1940s. However, many early special education programs were private and/or residential. The quality and availability of programs varied between states. Good special education programs were very rare, and for most children with disabilities, special education programs were not available. The first significant court case to impact children with disabilities actually dealt with racial segregation and not special education. In the opinion in the court case Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, the opinion says, quote, "Education must be made available to all on equal terms," end quote. This ultimately served as a basis for the admission to public schools of a number of previously limited or excluded populations, which included those classified by race, sex, and national origin. As a result, many lawsuits followed, and it led to a lot of new federal laws that really helped push the needle for special education. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act was signed into law by Lyndon B. Johnson as part of the War on Poverty. This landmark legislation provided resources to help ensure that disadvantaged students had access to quality education. ESEA not only called for equal access to education for all students, but also federal funding for both primary and secondary education for students disadvantaged by poverty. This was also one of the first times we saw large amounts of funds granted to special education students. President Gerald Ford signed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, otherwise known as Public Law 94-142. This law required all states that accepted money from the federal government were required to provide equal access to education for children with disabilities. Initially, the law focused on ensuring that children with disabilities had access to an education in due process of law. Congress included a very elaborate system of checks and balances that they called procedural safeguards that were designed to protect the rights of children and their parents. This law was amended one short year later, 1976, to ensure services to children that were born with disabilities would get those services beginning at birth. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act became the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 1997. President Bill Clinton reauthorized the idea with several key amendments that emphasized providing all students with access to the same curriculum. This saw a rise in inclusion in the classroom. Reauthorized in 2004, IDEA called for an increase in the focus on accountability and improved outcomes by emphasizing reading, early intervention, and research-based instruction by requiring that all special education teachers be highly qualified. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 2004 had two primary purposes. The first purpose was to provide an education that met a child's unique needs and prepared the child for further education, employment, and independent living. The second purpose was to protect the rights of both children with disabilities and their parents. In conclusion, there are four landmark cases of special education law that propelled special education forward in the United States. The first, Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, effectively ended segregation and discrimination in schools. It also paved the way for equality in education. Second, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 ensured disadvantaged students received resources to provide access to a quality education. This was also the first time we saw large funds go towards special education. Third, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975 provided a free, appropriate education for all. It also provided due process rights and procedural safeguards. And finally, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 1997 made it so that students would receive access to the same curriculum. And they also emphasize research-based instruction to teach our students as best and efficiently as possible. Thank you for watching my presentation. Here are the resources that I have included for my project.